Over the last number of years, I've walked the Camino of Santiago in Spain, and one place that I've visited at least 5-6 times is a place called O Cebreiro, and you'll find some videos on it on my channel. It's one of the highest points as you enter Galicia, just as you pass the border into Galicia, and it's a place where a Eucharistic miracle occurred. A few years ago, there was a young man called Carlo Acutis, and he catalogued all the miracles on his website. And he has a specific drawing, a specific picture of that particular miracle. I'll just show it to you here now, where you can see, for example, the priest celebrating and the man that's going up there. And it's a drawing exactly as he would have seen having visited that sanctuary. However, nobody ever corrected him to say, well, look, obviously what you've drawn there, that depiction of the miracle would never have happened in that way, because the priest at that time would have celebrated the Mass ad orientem. He wouldn't have celebrated that altar that Carlo saw when he visited O Cebreiro, and he drew the picture trying to redepict the Mass. In reality, is a fake photo, to say not the least. Now, not intentionally. He didn't intentionally fake it. He just didn't know how the Mass was celebrated, or didn't know the history of the liturgy. And we have to say, we have to give credit where credit is due. He was a teenager. How could he know? How could he know? But it always got me thinking, whenever I went to O Cebreiro and I'd see the miracle, the Eucharistic miracle of O Cebreiro, and I'd see that painting, that picture of the priest celebrating Mass to the ad populum, I always thought, gosh, maybe someday somebody will do the correct picture of how the miracle possibly occurred, which wouldn't have been like that. We are facing something similar in the church today, where we have redepicted our worship to the church as this is the only way that we can worship, and this is the graces that you're going to get from our worship, and so on and so forth, without taking stock of what we had for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Does anybody wonder why we only have one saint of the Eucharist in the canonized in the last 50 years? That if we look at the Novus Ordo, I mean, the Church has been rushing to canonize post-Vatican II popes. What about the laity? I mean, we have some Opus Dei people, but you could not say. Most of them were, Jose Maria Escrivá and so forth, most of them would have been formed in the old Mass. Where are the saints? Where are the saints from the 1970s on in the church? Where are the mystics, and where is our church growing? It kind of looks like a very interesting time in the church. And you'd wonder, what is going on with our spirituality? How many Catholics, for example, know or live in the unitive state of prayer, that have their life is transfixed to Christ? I mean, we don't even talk about it as something that we should be striving for, we should be aiming for. This is where our prayer life should be going. Many Catholics haven't a clue about this. When you go to Mass in any place in Ireland today, we have full active participation, supposedly. That's what we've been sold, as full active participation. But really, the question has to be asked, what exactly is full active participation in the Mass? When Saint Teresa of Avila elevated during the Mass, did she have full active participation? Did Saint Therese of Lisieux, did she have full active participation? Did Saint John of the Cross, did he have full active participation? Or Saint Teresa of the Cross, Edith Stein, did she have full active participation? Maximilian Kolbe, did he have full active participation? I do wonder how these saints managed to become saints without this so-called full active participation that we have in the church. If I go to Mass, traditional Latin Mass, okay, and I'm in a state of grace, I've gone to confession, I've done a good examination of conscience, I have prepared myself for Mass, I have my missal, and my heart is disposed to the graces that will happen during the sacrifice of the Mass. And I'm striving for that unit of prayer that feeds my soul. Is that not full, active, conscious participation in the Mass? And if it is, if it is, would we not do everything possible to foster that full, active, conscious participation in the sacrifice of the Mass? When Christ said to me, renew the Eucharist, back in 2016, he said, renew the Eucharist in my church. I had to discern, was that message from my imagination, from the devil, or from Christ? It's only three places it can come from, and I have a very active imagination. It could be my ego, it could be God knows what. So I had to discern, is it from God, the devil, or from Christ? And I asked Christ, okay, is it from you? You'll have to give me a sign, because I am simply not able to discern these things. And Christ, very literally, he threw my daughter's Holy Communion book from one side of the room to the other one evening before Christmas in front of the icon that's behind me. And I said, okay, that's a sign. That's what I asked for, a sign outside the church. I asked Christ, give me a Eucharistic sign outside the church. And I said, okay, that's a Eucharistic sign outside the church. Then I had to discern, okay, renew the Eucharist. How am I going to renew the Eucharist? Well, this is 2016, and I said, I'd only receive the Eucharist kneeling on the tongue. Okay, that's what I would do to renew the Eucharist. In my state of life, I wasn't a priest, and I do try as best I could with this blog to renew the Eucharist. Little did I know that simple act of faith, of kneeling to receive our Lord on the tongue here in Ireland, would become so political and so controversial and so divisive in our church. And I kind of understood why Christ was preparing me for this. So, I mean, the Eucharist is the Eucharist. No matter what anybody says, it's a dogma of the church. It's teaching that's millennium old. It's not something new that I'm going to give you, and it's freely given to the church. What we are seeing now, as you draw near to the Eucharist, if you love the Eucharist and you're drawing near to the Eucharist, I want that full, active, conscious participation in the Eucharist. Okay, I want more. I want to see Christ again and again and again, like I saw him on Calvary. I want to encounter that beating heart again and again and again. I want my heart to be consumed by the Eucharist. And for me, I need the silence and the prayer to allow me to enter into that unit of prayer with Christ. I just need that silence. And that's what I find at traditional Latin Mass. If I'm at a Novus Ordo, I would be distracted. It's very hard. I find it hard to pray. There's very little silence. There's no education on silence. And people will say, yes, Robert, but that's because it's an abuse. It shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be. But like every Novus Ordo Mass that I've been to in parishes, it's always the same. It shouldn't be like that, but it is like that. We'll have prayers of the faithful, go on and on and on, and it's ad-libbed half the time. And hello, everybody, and welcome this Mass. And this Mass is going to be offered for such and such and such and such. And it's great that you're here this Sunday. And let's start the Mass now. And it's great and after Mass now, and thank you for your Mrs. such and such and Mrs. such and such for being extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, and for the organist and the such and such that led the chant, and such that helps the church. You know what goes on at a Novus Ordo. It's full active participation is like a bingo hall roll call. That's what Novus Ordo has become in practice in many places. Whereas if you love the Eucharist and you want full, active, conscientious participation, then it really is the traditional Latin Mass. It really is that right. So as I've been going and studying the liturgy and studying the Mass, really trying to discern really what is Christ saying to me, because he's never actually said, now I want you to renew the traditional Latin Mass. He asked me to renew the Eucharist, and that he would speak to me in his church. So I have to be careful. Okay, well, what are you saying to me in the church? Who are you talking to me? What's the conversation? Where are we going? What do we have to do? I'm constantly meditating, reflecting on this. So, for example, in a church, if I go into a church in France, like I did in Bayonne, and I find a pre-1955 missal in the bin, and they said, yeah, you can have that, like for free, like a new missal, 1955 missal in a church in Bayonne. And I say, well, that's very interesting. I didn't have a traditional Latin Mass missal, and one landed itself freely in my care. So, the signs are there that what's Christ trying to do. Or when the Holy Spirit says in a bookshop, buy this book on the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass that's been written by Germans, because there used to be Germans that were good at theology. And I'm meditating and I'm looking at the whole structure of the traditional Latin Mass, the Eucharist. How the Mass was prepared and so forth during many years. So you're having these conversations and you're trying to dig deeper and dig deeper into the Mass. What is the Mass? Who is Christ? What did he do? I want to know him more and more and more. I want to meditate, and I want to go further and further and further into the Eucharist. It's vitally important that we discern what full active conscious participation is in the Mass. What is it? Is it activism? Is it reading and standing up and sitting down and responses and so forth? I've been in a Greek Catholic divine service, and there's a lot of back and forth in the Mass, in the divine service, and it can be very beautiful. There's a lot of chanting, and it can be very beautiful. It really touches your heart. Like the East, the Greek practices really touch your heart. But then again, all of the traditional Latin Mass profoundly engages the heart. It's that moment to have full active conscientious participation with the Eucharist. You know what's happening on the altar. You know what the priest is doing. And today we're all highly educated Catholics, mostly everywhere. We can take a missal or a phone or a tablet and follow the Mass, what the priest is saying and doing, and have that full active conscientious participation in what the Eucharist is. The Church needs to discern what has happened over the last 50 years and think about what has happened. Can Pope Paul VI have made a mistake about the highest form of prayer in the Church? Can John Paul II, Pope Benedict, or Pope Francis, can these popes have made a mistake about the highest form of worship in the Church? Is this worship engaging souls to draw them into a unitive state of prayer with Christ? Have they made a mistake? Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And why is it that I'm able to see this mistake in the Mass, in the liturgy? I'm able to see it because I'm able to judge what has happened in the Church over the last 50 years. I'm able to, for example, drawing from my own experience on where the Church has made mistakes, understand they are not perfect men. And sometimes judgment is clouded and they're not making decisions based on listening to the Holy Spirit. We only have to think in 1983 when St. John Paul II approved the constitutions of the Legionaries of Christ. Those constitutions were written, they were given to the Church to read, to understand, and to approve. And they were approved by the Church. Many people knew about Father Martial's allegations of abuse. Pope John Paul II knew about them, and yet he continued to support Father Martial. He continued to ignore what Cardinal Ratzinger was telling him, and instead listened to Cardinal Dziwisz, his secretary, and Cardinal Sodano at the time. So the Church makes errors in judgment. They don't see clearly what is before their eyes, or they refuse to see clearly. There are biases, and so forth. God permits this for a reason, for maybe to purify the Church. We don't know. But that is an example of what has happened. And I was a legionary of Christ. So I'm able to look, at these things, because we were sold a spirituality based on the fact that the Holy Father approved it. I was sold the spirituality of the Legion of Christ, saying, well, we're at the center of the church. We're walking with the church. This is what was told to us. You are walking with the church. We go step by step with the Pope. Step by step, paso a paso con el Papa. Step by step with the Pope. That's what we were told. Because look, we have a photo of St. John, he was Pope John Paul II. Look, he's approving the constitutions with Father Marcial. Look, we're approved. Everything is approved. It's all canonically approved, step by step, And yet under the hood, even though we were walking step by step with the church, and even though the church knew about the allegations since 1941, so Pope Pius XII knew about them, and had Father Marcial suspended. And he got rehabilitated with Pope Paul VI, like Bugnini did. Bugnini was shunted out, but they rehabilitated Bugnini, Paul VI. Paul VI had a great way of rehabilitating certain people. And that happened with Father Marcial. He got rehabilitated by Paul VI. And he maneuvered himself in with John Paul II. And when John Paul II heard about the allegations, which were all known in the Vatican, they're all written, they're all in documents, he ignored them. These men are flawed. We're all men. We're all struggling. We're all struggling in the church. It's never easy. It's never easy. But we must talk in the church. We must listen in the church. Christ will speak in his church because he has told me that. I will speak in my church. That's what he has said. And the best way for people to speak in the church is to hear the voices from where Christ is speaking, and not just one section of the church. Why not get a group together of people that love the Eucharist, that profoundly love if we look at this synodal document, the heresy document that the Irish bishops have published, look at what they've mentioned on the Eucharist. Have they even a clue of the stages of prayer and how to lead souls to pray? It's not even mentioned there. Catechism, teaching, it's not mentioned. We can all see what was written in the heresy document from Ireland, because that's what it is. It's the roadmap to hell. That document is the roadmap. There's no other way to say it. It's the roadmap to hell. And God forbid that ever got implemented in the church. Most of it. What's missing is simply incredible. If full active conscientious participation in the Mass is your heart united to Christ. Because if your heart is united to Christ as a man, you're not looking at pornography, you're not going to cheat on your wife, you're not going to beat up your kids, you're not going to abuse people, you're going to be generous, you're going to look after the poor, you're going to live the gospel. The gospel will live in your heart. That is, yes, full active conscientious participation in the Mass is you writing that gospel in your heart, listening to it, praying the gospel, praying the rosary with your family, leading them in prayer. That is full active conscientious participation. For those who go to Mass today, it's the faith is something there that we might do on a Sunday, but it doesn't really impact our day-to-day lives. We don't think about it. We don't identify as Catholics anymore. Catholicism is like, in a way, is like your favorite football team or something like that in Ireland. And this is where the church has got it fundamentally wrong. If you meditate on the Mass, if you understand what participation in the Mass is, which you have to prepare for, you need confession. You need to understand what's separating you from you need to understand what's separating you from Christ. What was the book? I don't know, do people read San Juan de la Cruz? I have Las Obras Completas, so all of the complete works of San Juan. If you read San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, and it can be a bit dense, it could take time, but if you read him, he's a very practical man in a sense. Like, he's able to explain the spiritual life in a very practical way, because he was actually writing to lay people. You know, a lot of the stuff that he's writing in there, mystical, he's a mystic, but a lot of the stuff that he was writing there, he's writing it to lay people like me. So in effect, if you can read some of this stuff, it's directed to lay. It's not directed to always to religious. You know, we are called to be saints as well. We are called to enter that unitive state of prayer. I mean, that's what Christ is drawing me to, prayer and contemplation in my day-to-day life. That is where Christ wants me at the moment. He wants me there, and he wants me to as much as possible unite myself to him, because he said, you will do nothing without me. Don't you dare try and push your will into the project. You don't matter. I don't matter anymore. It's Christ. It's his heart that needs to be renewed in the church. And that's the message that needs to get to those who can hear it. That will renew the church. Full, active, conscientious participation in the Mass is your heart inflamed for Christ. It's receiving Christ it's receiving him as if he's your everything. And this is where traditional Latin Mass completely knits it together. If you think what happened was they took the sacrifice of the Mass after Vatican II, after Sacrosanctum Concilium, and in a very rushed job, hatched out stuff and put stuff together very, very quickly, very, very hastily, without doing what we call in the business world, alpha and a beta release. Doing the testing, seeing, okay, well, let's put this Mass into, say, one country, and let's see how the spiritual life progresses in that country when we introduce that Mass. And they didn't do any of this. They was bang, let's go forward, this is the new thing, and let's see what happens. Has it increased saints in the church? Has it happened? Does it increase the unitive state of prayer for people? Where? Do you know what I mean? We look at all the indications. People just have to look at the indications that are out there. If people understood the immensity of the Eucharist, the traditional Latin Mass just lends itself to that. The church should be extremely careful when it comes to changing the highest form of prayer and worship in the church. It should be done with extreme care and never quickly, and never what they did in Vatican II. That was the biggest shock that we've ever seen in the Roman Rite since its inception. Never before have we done this. Ever. Never happened. And then we're wondering why the church is struggling. Well, the church is struggling is because we do not have that encounter with Christ. We're not able to see him in our spiritual life. He has been eclipsed. He has been eclipsed. He isn't absent. He's still there in the Novus Ordo. He's still there. He's standing there. But he's drawing us forward. He said, guys, come on, take a step forward and encounter me. Come in silence. Come in silence. It's the silence, guys. It's the silence. Cardinal Sarah, God bless him. What a holy man. He gets it. You need silence. And especially in the highest form of prayer in the church, we need silence. We need silence. One of the most profound experiences of my faith was the pre-1955 Holy Week Easter Vigil, where they read the 12 readings. And I remember being at a Mass, and we did it in the vernacular, all of the readings in the vernacular. And so 12 people stood up and we did the readings. I thought, this is the most amazing thing. I never knew about this. I think there's something missing in our beautiful faith. And it's important that people discern not everything the popes get right is correct and from God. It simply isn't. It simply isn't. But look, we have to pray. Okay, God bless. Take care.